The rain hammered Norfolk Naval Base like artillery fire at 300 hours, turning the tarmac into a mirror of streaming lights and shadows. Most personnel had taken shelter, but one figure moved methodically across the flight line, pushing a yellow maintenance cart through puddles that reached her ankles. Captain Alina Vasquez, call sign Cypher, had traded her FA-18 Super Hornet cockpit for a janitor's uniform 6 months ago, and nobody at Norfolk knew why. The Navy's rumor mill had ground her name into dust whispers of a classified incident over the South China Sea, of a mission that went dark, of a pilot who broke under pressure. She never corrected them. She just cleaned hangars at night, picked up her daughter from daycare at dawn, and disappeared into a life so small it couldn't contain questions. Tonight she was emptying trash bins outside Hangar 7 when she saw him, a figure in service dress blues, no cover, standing in the downpour like a statue. The stripes on his sleeve caught the sodium lights. 4 stars. She knew that posture, that specific rigidity of a flag officer who'd been standing too long at too many memorials. He wasn't moving, just staring at the hangar where an E-2D Advanced Hawkeye sat with its distinctive rotodome, its radar array folded like sleeping wings. Alina approached slowly, rain soaking through her maintenance coveralls. Up close, she recognized him from briefings she'd attended in another lifetime Rear Admiral Marcus Holt, commander of Carrier Strike Group 12. His face was carved from fatigue, eyes tracking something only he could see. She knew that look. She'd worn it herself. Without a word, she pulled the Navy-issue poncho from her cart and draped it over his shoulders. He flinched, awareness returning like someone surfacing from deep water. Their eyes met. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, something passed between them, the recognition that exists only between people who have lived in the thin space between sky and consequence. He didn't ask why a janitor carried a poncho. She didn't ask why an admiral stood alone in a storm. He nodded once, a gesture weighted with more than gratitude, and walked toward the headquarters building. Alina returned to her cart, to her trash bins, to her deliberately invisible life. She had 45 minutes left on her shift. Then the familiar drive to her apartment where her 8-year-old daughter slept surrounded by drawings of airplanes. She'd never see her mother fly again. 3 days later, at 6:20 hours, someone knocked on her apartment door with the specific rhythm of military precision. Alina was braiding Sophia's hair for school, the morning routine that kept her anchored to this new gravity. She opened the door with Sophia hiding behind her leg, and her breath stopped. Admiral Holt stood in her doorway, but he wasn't alone. Behind him stood Commander Sarah Chen from JAG, Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez from Naval Intelligence, and 2 captains she recognized from her former squadron. They weren't in dress uniform. They wore flight suits. Holt's eyes carried the same weight she'd seen in the rain, but now it had purpose behind it. "Captain Vasquez," he said, voice formal despite the intimacy of her doorway, "we need to discuss why you really left active flight status and why the Navy needs Cypher back in the air." Sophia's small hand gripped Alina's leg tighter. The drawings on the refrigerator behind her FA-18s in crayon, always flying toward the sun, suddenly felt prophetic. Alina had spent 6 months building walls between herself and the sky. Now the sky had found her address. The apartment was too small for this conversation, but Holt didn't suggest they go elsewhere. He understood, Alina realized, that pulling her back into the world of carriers and combat meant invading the sanctuary she'd built for Sophia. He sat on her worn couch like it was a ready-room chair, direct and uncomfortable. "6 months ago," he began, "you were flying CAP during Operation Steadfast Guardian when your Super Hornet experienced catastrophic hydraulic failure over the South China Sea. Your wingman, Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, call sign Prospect, transmitted that you were inverted at 400 feet, losing altitude, and advised you to eject." Alina's fingers found Sophia's shoulder, steadying herself through her daughter rather than despite her. She hadn't spoken these words aloud to anyone. Holt continued, not waiting for confirmation. "You didn't eject. You flew hydraulics out, manually controlling surfaces through backup systems, and landed on the USS Ronald Reagan in Sea State 4 with a 30-degree crosswind. The LSO called it impossible. Your squadron called it luck, and then you requested immediate transfer to shore duty, accepted a reduction in responsibilities, and disappeared. Commander Chen stepped forward, tablet in hand. What nobody in your squadron knew, Captain, was that the hydraulic failure wasn't mechanical. Our investigation took 5 months, but we found it. A microsecond electromagnetic pulse, origin classified, that specifically targeted your aircraft's fly-by-wire systems. You weren't lucky. You were the only pilot in the Navy who could have survived that attack. The word attack landed in her small kitchen like ordnance. Sophia pulled away from Alina's hand, moving to her bedroom with the instinct children have for adult conversations that reshape worlds. Alina watched her go, then turned back to the officers crowding her living space. "I survived," she said quietly, "because I'd spent 6 years flying vintage aircraft at test pilot school before transitioning to Hornets. I learned manual control on planes that didn't have computers between me and the air. But that same manual control meant I felt everything, every degree of instability, every inch I was falling, every tenth of a second I had before hitting the water." Her voice remained steady, but her hands weren't. "I landed that plane, and then I spent 3 hours in medical being told I was fine before I went home and couldn't touch my daughter because I was still holding that stick so hard my hands wouldn't straighten. That's why I left. Not fear. Exhaustion. The kind that comes from being too competent for anyone's good, including my own." Lieutenant Rodriguez spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of intelligence officers delivering classified information. "The electromagnetic attack on your aircraft was part of a larger pattern we've since identified 17 separate incidents across the Pacific Fleet, targeting specific pilots with specific skill sets. All women, all former test pilots, all mothers." The tactical picture formed in Alina's mind with the clarity that had made her cipher. The call sign she'd earned not for being cryptic, but for seeing patterns others missed. "Someone's testing whether we'll break differently," Alina said, the analysis automatic despite 6 months away from briefing rooms. "Not testing our planes, testing us, seeing if maternal instinct creates a vulnerability in decision-making under catastrophic stress." Holt nodded slowly. "And you proved the opposite. You didn't break. You flew better than any pilot we've ever recorded under those conditions because you had more reason to survive than just yourself." "That's what I realized standing in that rain at Norfolk, Captain. I've been in the Navy 32 years, and I've watched us build better aircraft, better weapons, better sensors. But we keep forgetting that the human in the cockpit isn't a component to be optimized. It's the whole reason the technology matters." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I wasn't standing in that storm by accident. I was standing outside the hangar where we keep the E-2D because my daughter flew Hawkeyes." Commander Rachel Holt. She was one of the 17 targeted. She ejected over the Philippine Sea 2 months ago during a routine AEW mission when her aircraft lost all flight controls. We recovered her, but she's in Bethesda now, and the doctors say she may never fly again. Not because of physical injuries, because of what it took from her to make that choice. The apartment was silent except for the old refrigerator's hum and the distant sound of Sophia singing to herself in her room. Alina understood now why Holt had accepted her poncho in the rain, why he'd found her address, why he'd brought his whole team to her door. This wasn't about pulling one pilot back to duty. This was about a father watching his daughter pay the cost of a threat nobody else was taking seriously. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Alina's question was tactical, not emotional, even though both were present. Commander Chen activated her tablet, projecting an image onto Alina's kitchen wall, an aircraft Alina had never seen in active service. It had the basic profile of an FA-18, but modified extensively. Canards behind the cockpit, enlarged air intakes, and what looked like additional hardpoints under a stretched fuselage. "This is the FA-18X Ghost Hornet," Chen explained. "Developmental aircraft built specifically to test countermeasures against electromagnetic warfare. It has triple redundant systems, manual backup controls for every surface, and shielding we've adapted from our most classified programs. It's been in testing for 18 months at Pax River, but we've reached the limits of what test pilots can tell us. We need someone who's actually survived the attack profile to take it operational. Rodriguez pulled up another image, a tactical map of the South China Sea, marked with red zones Alina recognized from intelligence briefings. 3 days ago, satellite reconnaissance identified a vessel operating in international waters near the Spratly Islands. The electromagnetic signature matches the profile from your incident and from the attack on Commander Holt's aircraft. We believe it's a platform specifically designed to target and disable carrier-based aircraft, testing vulnerabilities in our Pacific Air wings. Alina studied the map with the instinct of someone who'd spent years reading threat assessments. The vessel's position was deliberate, close enough to monitor carrier operations, far enough to claim innocence. "You want me to fly this Ghost Hornet into their engagement zone and see if they take the bait," Alina said. "See if their electromagnetic weapon can disable an aircraft that's been specifically hardened against it. Use myself as both target and countermeasure." Holt's expression didn't change. "Yes, but not alone and not unprepared. We're assembling a flight of 4 all-women who were previously targeted, all pilots who have demonstrated the ability to fly through catastrophic systems failure. You'll have full carrier support, surveillance, and extraction protocols. But Captain Vasquez, I need to be clear about what I'm asking. This operation exists because 17 of our best pilots were specifically hunted, and we need to know if we can protect the next 17. Your daughter is in the next room. I'm asking you to risk the same thing Commander Holt already lost." Sophia's singing had stopped. Alina wondered if her daughter was listening, if 8-year-old ears could parse the difference between her mother being asked to go away and her mother being asked to fly again. "How long do I have to decide?" Alina asked. "Wheels Up is in 72 hours from Naval Air Station Oceana," Rodriguez said. "The carrier USS Theodore Roosevelt is already in position. The window of surveillance on that vessel closes in 96 hours. After that, we lose them for months, maybe longer. 3 days. Alina looked at the drawing on her refrigerator, at Sophia's careful crayon work showing an FA-18 with the sun behind it, and she realized her daughter had always drawn the aircraft climbing, never level, never landing, always reaching for altitude. That evening, after Sophia was in bed and the officers had left her apartment with promises to respect whatever decision she made, Alina sat in the dark living room holding her old helmet bag. She'd kept it in the closet behind winter coats and storage boxes, buried deliberately where everyday life wouldn't disturb it. Inside was her helmet, customized with the cipher call sign in small, precise letters, and beneath that, her logbook. She opened it to the last entry, dated 6 months and 4 days ago. "Survived what I was trained for. Not sure I'll survive what I wasn't." She'd written it in the medical bay of the USS Ronald Reagan while her hands still shook, before she'd made the calls that would pull her out of the sky and put her in maintenance coveralls. Now she pulled out a pen and added a new line. "Sophia draws planes that climb. Maybe she sees something I forgot." The next morning, Alina took Sophia to school early, then drove to Norfolk. She found Holt in the Air Operations Building, standing at a window overlooking the flight line where early morning launches were already underway. F/A-18s catapulting into the dawn with the violent grace that never stopped taking her breath away. "I need to know something first," Alina said without preamble. "Your daughter, Commander Holt, when she ejected, when she made that choice, does she regret it?" Holt was quiet for long enough that Alina thought he might not answer. Then, "She regrets that she had to. She regrets that someone put her in a position where the only way to survive was to abandon her aircraft. But she doesn't regret surviving. She's proud she made the tactical decision correctly, even if the strategic situation was designed to break her." Alina nodded slowly. That was the answer she needed. "I'll fly your mission, Admiral, but not because I'm trying to prove I'm not broken, and not because I want revenge for what happened to me or to your daughter. I'll fly it because Sophia needs to grow up in a world where being competent and being a mother aren't seen as conflicting vulnerabilities. And the only way that happens is if someone proves those things make us stronger, not weaker." Holt extended his hand. Then welcome back to flight status, Captain. We brief at 1400 hours. The handshake was firm, professional, carrying the weight of what they were both committing to. As Alina left the building, she pulled out her phone and called the daycare. This is Alina Vasquez. I need to update my emergency contact information and my work schedule. There's going to be some changes. On the flight line behind her, another FA-18 launched, and the roar of its engines felt like a language she'd been pretending not to speak. That afternoon, Alina stood in a classified briefing room at Oceana surrounded by 3 other pilots she recognized from reputation and from the intelligence files now spread across the secure table. Captain Jennifer Valkyrie Morrison, former F-35C pilot who'd survived an electromagnetic attack during night operations off the coast of Japan. Major Lisa Redline Santos, Marine Corps Harrier pilot who'd manually landed her aircraft on the USS Essex after total systems failure. And Lieutenant Commander Ashley Prophet Zhang, EA-18G Growler pilot who not only survived an attack but had managed to record partial electronic warfare data before her aircraft went dark. 4 women who'd been hunted. 4 pilots who'd refused to break. Admiral Holt entered with Commander Chen and Lieutenant Rodriguez, followed by a civilian. Alina didn't recognize a woman in her 50s wearing a Department of Defense badge and carrying herself with the specific confidence of someone who built things other people flew. This is Dr. Patricia Nwasu, Holt introduced, lead engineer on the Ghost Hornet program. She's here to brief you on exactly what you'll be flying and why we think it'll keep you alive. Dr. Nwasu activated the briefing room's holographic display, and the FA-18X materialized in 3 dimensions above the table. Ladies, what you're looking at is the result of 18 months of reverse engineering the electromagnetic attack profile that targeted your aircraft. We recovered enough data from Captain Vasquez's incident and from Lieutenant Commander Zhang's Growler to identify the specific frequencies and pulse patterns being used. The Ghost Hornet has been built with shielding that should disperse those pulses without affecting flight controls. She rotated the hologram, highlighting modifications. The triple redundant systems aren't just backups, they're isolated from each other electronically. If one system is compromised, the others won't cascade fail. You'll have manual controls for every surface, similar to aircraft from the 1970s, but integrated with modern fly-by-wire through a switching system you control. Valkyrie leaned forward, studying the canards. Those forward control surfaces, are they for high angle of attack performance or for manual control authority? Both, Dr. Nwasu said, clearly pleased someone had asked the right question. If you lose primary flight controls and switch to manual, those canards give you significantly more control authority than a standard Super Hornet. We've also modified the engine intakes and added boundary layer control systems. This aircraft can fly slower and at higher angles of attack than anything in the current inventory. Alina saw the design philosophy immediately. You built this for the moment everything fails, not for optimal performance, but for survivable performance when nothing works right. Exactly, Dr. Nwasu confirmed. The Ghost Hornet isn't faster or more maneuverable than a standard FA-18E under normal conditions. But when conditions become abnormal, when you're flying on backup systems, when your displays are dark, when you're manually controlling surfaces, it's the most survivable fighter aircraft ever built. It's designed for pilots who can fly broken planes because we've learned that's the future of electromagnetic warfare. The question isn't if your aircraft will be compromised, it's whether you can still fight when it is. The 4 pilots exchanged glances. This was different from any combat aircraft briefing Alina had attended. Usually the focus was on lethality, on how effectively you could deliver ordnance or defeat enemy aircraft. This briefing was about surviving long enough to make those other capabilities matter. Commander Chen took over, pulling up the tactical display of the South China Sea. Your mission profile is straightforward in concept, complex in execution. The USS Theodore Roosevelt will be conducting routine flight operations in international waters, approximately 200 nautical miles from the suspected location of the electromagnetic warfare vessel. You'll launch as a standard four-ship CAP, following normal patrol patterns. At a predetermined point, you'll break from the patrol and push toward the vessel's suspected position. We expect they'll track you on radar, and, if the pattern holds, attempt to disable your aircraft once you're within effective range of their weapon system. Your objective is to continue flying after they hit you, demonstrate that our countermeasures work, and collect electronic warfare data on their exact capabilities. Redline spoke up, her voice carrying the blunt pragmatism of Marine Corps aviation. And if the countermeasures don't work, if we get hit and the Ghost Hornets fail the same way our original aircraft did, Lieutenant Rodriguez answered that one, then you eject and we extract you. The Roosevelt will have SAR helicopters airborne throughout your mission, and will have additional assets positioned for combat search and rescue if needed. But Captain, if the countermeasures don't work, then we'll know we need a different approach before we send more pilots into this threat environment. Either way, we get data we desperately need. Alina appreciated the honesty. This wasn't being sold as a guaranteed success. It was being framed as a necessary experiment with uncertain outcomes. "What's our loadout?" she asked. Chen smiled slightly. "That's the interesting part. You'll be carrying live ordnance AMRAAM, Sidewinder, and precision-guided munitions. If the electromagnetic attack fails to disable your aircraft, and you have clear confirmation of the vessel's hostile intent, you are authorized to engage and neutralize the platform. This mission has both defensive and offensive objectives." The room's energy shifted. This wasn't just a test flight or an intelligence-gathering mission. This was potentially a combat operation against a threat that had been hunting American pilots for months. Prophet, who'd been quiet until now, asked the question Alina was thinking. What's the rules of engagement threshold? At what point do we transition from being targets to being shooters? That's being determined at levels above this briefing, Holt said carefully. But understand this. If you confirm that vessel is actively attacking American military aircraft in international waters, you have the inherent right of self-defense. How you exercise that right will depend on the tactical situation and your assessment as flight lead. He looked directly at Alina. Which brings us to the leadership structure. Captain Vasquez, your flight lead. Call sign Cypher. The other pilots will be your wingmen. You survived the longest under electromagnetic attack. You have the most experience with manual flight controls, and frankly, you've already proven you can make the right decisions when everything goes wrong. Alina felt the weight of that assignment settle across her shoulders like a familiar flight harness. 6 months ago, she'd walked away from exactly this kind of responsibility. Now she was being asked to lead 3 other pilots into the same threat that had nearly killed her. She looked at Valkyrie, Redline, and Prophet, saw in their faces the same determination she'd felt standing in the rain, the same refusal to let someone else define their capabilities. "Understood, sir. When do we start training?" "Now," Dr. Nwasu said. "You have 36 hours to familiarize yourself with the Ghost Hornet, run simulator profiles, and gel as a flight. The aircraft are already at Oceana. Your maintenance crews are being briefed on the classified modifications. And Captain Vasquez, there's one more thing you should know." She pulled up a photo of a small patch circular with 4 stars arranged around a lightning bolt and text that read "Electromagnetic Warfare Test Flight." "This is unofficial, not approved through any official channels, but I had them made for you anyway, because if you succeed, this won't be the last flight of Ghost Hornets. It'll be the first of a new capability we'll need throughout the fleet. And if you don't succeed, well, at least you'll have flown wearing something that recognized what you were really doing." Alina took the patch Dr. Nwasu offered, feeling the embroidered texture under her fingers. She'd worn squadron patches her entire career, each one representing belonging to a specific unit, a specific mission, a specific identity. This patch represented something different, proof that someone in the vast machinery of the Navy had looked at what happened to 17 female pilots and decided it wasn't acceptable, that it required response rather than just investigation. That night, Alina brought Sophia to the Ocean of Flight line, under the cover of darkness and special authorization from Admiral Holt. Her daughter held her hand as they walked across the tarmac toward the hangar where four FA-18X Ghost Hornets sat in careful formation, their modified profiles strange and purposeful under the harsh fluorescent lights. "They look different from the ones you used to fly," Sophia said, 8-year-old observation cutting straight to the truth. "They are different," Alina confirmed. "They're built for when things go wrong instead of when things go right. That makes them special." Sophia studied the aircraft with serious concentration, then looked up at her mother. "Are you going to fly them?" Alina knelt down so they were eye level, so this conversation could happen face to face instead of across the distance between adult and child. "Yes, I'm going to fly one of them on a mission that's important. It means I'll be away for a little while, but Aunt Carmen will stay with you, and I'll video call every day I can." "Is it dangerous?" Sophia asked, and Alina remembered being 8 years old herself, remembered asking her own mother similar questions before deployments, remembered the careful balance between honesty and reassurance. "Flying is always a little bit dangerous," Alina said, "but I'm very good at it, and I'll be flying with other pilots who are also very good at it. And Sophia, I need you to understand something. The reason I stopped flying before wasn't because I was scared. It was because I needed to remember why I started flying in the first place. Now I remember." Sophia's hand tightened around hers. "Because you love it." "Because I love you," Alina corrected. "And I want you to grow up knowing that being good at something and being someone's mom aren't opposites. They're the same thing, just from different angles. Does that make sense?" Sophia thought about it with the gravity of someone processing information that would shape how she saw the world. Then she nodded and hugged her mother with the fierce completeness of 8-year-old affection. Over her daughter's shoulder, Alina saw Dr. Nwasu standing in the hangar entrance, giving them space but also bearing witness to this moment. The engineer raised one hand in a small wave acknowledgement between women who understood that competence and care weren't contradictions, just different expressions of the same strength. The next 36 hours were a compressed education in flying aircraft designed for survival rather than superiority. Alina strapped into the Ghost Hornet's cockpit and immediately felt the differences. The manual backup controls were prominent, a mechanical linkage system that ran parallel to the fly-by-wire, activated by a red-guarded switch on the stick. The displays were simpler, fewer glass surfaces that could fail, more analog backup instruments that would function without electrical power. The aircraft felt heavier on the controls, less twitchy, more deliberate. Dr. Nwasu's voice came through the headset as Alina ran through pre-flight checks. "The Ghost Hornet won't win any dogfights against a standard Super Hornet in optimal conditions. But optimal conditions aren't what we're designing for anymore. Try the manual control switch." Alina flipped the red guard and activated the backup system. Immediately, the control stick feedback changed. She could feel the direct mechanical connection to the control surfaces, the same visceral response she'd experienced during her emergency landing 6 months ago. But this time, it was intentional, designed, supported by systems built specifically for this mode of flight. "Good," Dr. Nwasu said. "Now understand that when you switch to manual, you lose all the computer assistance. No auto trim, no envelope protection, no load factor limiting. You're flying the plane the way pilots did in 1975, except with modern engines and weapons systems. It'll be exhausting, especially in high-G maneuvering, but it also means no computer can be compromised to override your inputs." The simulation flights were brutal. Alina and her flight of 4 ran profile after profile where electromagnetic attacks hit them at different altitudes, different speeds, different tactical situations. They practiced switching to manual controls while inverted, while in high-G turns, while during weapons employment. Each scenario ended the same way: fly the aircraft to a controlled landing despite catastrophic systems failures. By the end of the second day, Alina's hands ached from gripping the stick. Her shoulders burned from manually controlling surfaces that usually had computer assistance, and her mind was saturated with the specific feel of an aircraft that handled like no other fighter she'd flown. But she could do it. They all could. Valkyrie had the lightest touch on manual controls, compensating for the Ghost Hornet's heavier response with precise small inputs. Redline flew with Marine Corps aggression, pushing the aircraft harder than the computer would allow, testing the edges of its manual flight envelope. Prophet brought her electronic warfare expertise, constantly monitoring the displays that would give them warning of incoming electromagnetic attacks. They weren't just a flight of 4 pilots. They were a capability specifically built to survive what had nearly killed them before. On the third day, at 500 hours, Alina stood on the Oceana ramp watching maintenance crews fuel and arm the 4 Ghost Hornets for their ferry flight to the USS Theodore Roosevelt. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the eastern horizon carried that specific pre-dawn glow that every military pilot knew, the light that meant morning brief, launch sequences, and missions that would define whether you'd earned the uniform. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sophia, sent via Aunt Carmen's phone at an hour 8-year-olds shouldn't be awake. Fly high, mama. Draw lots of airplanes in the sky for me. Love you. Alina read it 3 times, then showed it to Valkyrie, who was standing beside her drinking coffee that smelled like it had been brewed in the previous decade. Your daughter? Valkyrie asked. Alina nodded. Mine's 9. She asked me last night if I was going to be a pilot again. I told her I never stopped being one, I was just on a break. She said that made sense because sometimes she takes breaks from being good at math, but she's still smart. They stood together in the pre-dawn darkness, 2 mothers who'd spent months believing they had to choose between the cockpit and the carpool, both now understanding that the choice itself had been the weapon designed to make them doubt the very competence that made them dangerous. Admiral Holt's car pulled onto the ramp, and he emerged already in his working uniform, carrying a folder marked with classification stamps that meant the final mission brief was about to happen. The other pilots gathered, Redline and Prophet joining the circle of people who'd committed to flying toward the threat instead of away from it. Ladies, Holt began, and Alina noticed he didn't use their ranks. This was personal now, beyond the hierarchy that usually defined military communication. The carrier is in position. The surveillance indicates the electromagnetic warfare vessel is active and monitoring our operations. Intelligence suggests they're aware we've modified our aircraft, but they don't know how or to what extent. This gives us a tactical advantage. They'll likely attack, assuming our countermeasures are incremental improvements, not fundamental redesigns. You'll launch as part of the Roosevelt's normal air wing operations at 900 hours local time. Your call signs and missions are on the manifest as a standard combat air patrol. At the designated point, you break pattern and push toward the target. Estimated time from break to engagement is 12 minutes. Questions? Redline raised her hand. Are we clear to talk about this with the air wing, or is our mission compartmented from the rest of the carrier's operations? Compartmented, Commander Chen answered, stepping forward. The air wing knows you're joining them, but they believe you're testing new avoidance systems. Only the air wing commander, the carrier captain, and the intelligence cell know the full scope. This protects operational security and also means you won't be flying with the weight of everyone else's expectations. You succeed or fail based on your own performance, not on anyone else's awareness. Alina appreciated that. The last thing they needed was the entire air wing watching their launch, adding pressure to a mission that already carried enough. Prophet asked the tactical question. If we succeed in surviving the electromagnetic attack and we're cleared to engage, what's the target priority? The vessel itself or specific systems on the vessel? Lieutenant Rodriguez pulled up imagery on his tablet satellite reconnaissance of a ship that looked like a commercial cargo vessel, but with modifications that intelligence had identified as suspicious. Enlarged antenna arrays, unusual hull structures that might house generators, and a deck configuration that didn't match civilian shipping patterns. Priority is the electromagnetic warfare capability itself. If you can identify and destroy the specific systems generating the attacks without sinking the vessel, that's preferable. It allows us to board and gather intelligence. But if the tactical situation requires neutralizing the entire platform to ensure your safety and that of other air-wing aircraft, you're authorized to do so. This isn't about proportional response. This is about ending a capability that's been hunting our pilots. The sun broke over the horizon, flooding the ramp with light that turned the Ghost Hornets from gray shadows into defined aircraft, their modified profiles suddenly vivid and purposeful. Alina felt the shift in her body, the transition from person standing on the ground to pilot preparing for flight. Her hands stopped aching. Her shoulders remembered the strength instead of the fatigue. Her mind organized itself around the tactical picture, the weapons systems, the communication protocols, the thousands of small details that had to align for a mission to succeed. "Anything else, Admiral?" she asked. Holt looked at each of them in turn, his expression carrying something Alina had learned to recognize during her career, the specific concern of someone who sends others into danger while staying behind. "Come back," he said simply. "All four of you. Come back and tell us if this works, because if it does, we're going to build a lot more of these aircraft. And if it doesn't, then we need to know that too, because 17 pilots have already paid part of the price for our ignorance. I don't want there to be a 18th. The ferry flight to the carrier was uneventful, 3 hours of overwater navigation with tanker support and clear skies. Alina led the formation, maintaining radio discipline, flying the Ghost Hornet with the careful attention of someone learning a new aircraft's personality. It responded differently than a standard Super Hornet, heavier in roll, more stable in pitch, requiring more deliberate control inputs. But it felt solid, trustworthy, like an aircraft that had been built by people who understood what happened when trust in your plane became the only thing between you and the ocean. The USS Theodore Roosevelt appeared on the horizon as a massive gray presence cutting through blue water, its angled deck crowded with aircraft in various stages of preparation. The carrier-controlled approach brought them into the pattern behind a flight of F-35CS that trapped with the precise violence of carrier aviation 30,000 pounds of aircraft, arrested from flight speed to zero in less than 2 seconds. Alina trapped first, her Ghost Hornet catching the 3-wire with a deceleration that pressed her forward against the harness with familiar force. The deck crew guided her to parking, and as she raised the canopy, the smell of jet fuel and salt air hit her with sensory memory so strong it was almost overwhelming. 6 months ago, she'd landed on a carrier believing it would be her last time. Now she was back, flying an aircraft that existed because someone decided her survival had been important enough to warrant response. The Roosevelt's Air Wing commander met them on the flight deck, Captain Marcus Thompson, call sign Hammer, a career Navy pilot whose reputation included being direct to the point of bluntness and absolutely committed to the pilots under his command. "Cypher," he said, shaking Alina's hand as she climbed down from the cockpit. "Been reading about you for 6 months without knowing it was you. That hydraulics out landing you made on the Reagan got circulated through every carrier air wing in the fleet as a case study in not giving up. Now I find out you were also shot at by some asshole with an electromagnetic weapon, and instead of staying safely on shore duty, you volunteered to come back and get shot at again. That's either really brave or really crazy." "Probably both, sir," Alina said, appreciating his directness. "But mostly it's tactical necessity wearing the disguise of personal choice." Hammer nodded, understanding the distinction. "Your brief is in 30 minutes. Intel Cell has updated imagery of the target. And Captain, off the record, there's about 200 pilots on this boat who are watching your flight even though they don't officially know what you're doing. Whatever you prove out there, it matters to more people than just you four. No pressure." The briefing room was smaller than the ones at Oceana, cramped with the efficiency of shipboard spaces where every square foot served multiple purposes. The intelligence officer, a lieutenant commander whose name tag read Vance, pulled up the latest reconnaissance imagery. The target vessel had moved slightly, now positioned in a shipping lane that gave it cover as legitimate traffic while also putting it within range of the Roosevelt's operating area. "The pattern is consistent," Vance explained. Monitor our flight operations, identify aircraft that match their target profile, and engage with their electromagnetic weapon when those aircraft are far enough from the carrier that an emergency would be challenging, but close enough that they can observe results. It's methodical, scientific even. They're learning our capabilities by systematically attacking our pilots. Redline leaned forward, studying the vessel's position. What's the effective range of their weapon? Do we know where the engagement line is? Based on previous incidents, approximately 40 to 60 nautical miles from their position, Vance said. But that's not a hard boundary. They may have improved their capability or they may engage at different ranges depending on tactical considerations. Your electronic warfare suite should give you warning before actual engagement, but that warning time could be as little as 10 to 15 seconds. Alina calculated mentally. At 450 knots, 15 seconds was less than 2 nautical miles. Not much time to prepare for your aircraft to potentially lose all flight controls. What about their defensive capabilities? She asked. If we survive their attack and go offensive, what are we flying into? Unknown, Vance admitted. The vessel appears to be a modified cargo ship, probably Chinese in origin based on hull characteristics, but operating under a flag of convenience. It's possible they have short-range air defense systems, man-portable missiles at minimum, possibly something more sophisticated. We're also not ruling out the possibility of air cover from shore-based aircraft, though you'll be operating at the edge of most tactical aircraft ranges. Prophet, whose electronic warfare expertise made her the most qualified to assess this particular threat, asked the critical question. Is there any chance this is a civilian vessel that happens to have unusual electromagnetic emissions? Any possibility we're about to attack something that isn't actually hostile? No, Vance said flatly. We've correlated their emissions with the exact signature from Captain Vasquez's incident and from 14 other attacks. We've tracked their movement patterns across 3 months. They specifically positioned themselves near carrier operations. And most importantly, we intercepted communications between that vessel and a shore facility that explicitly discussed target engagement results and female pilot response patterns. This isn't accidental. This isn't research. This is weapons testing using American pilots as targets, and they've been getting away with it because the attacks look like equipment failures, unless you know exactly what to look for. The room was silent. Alina saw her own anger reflected in the faces of Valkyrie, Redline, and Prophet, the specific fury that comes from learning you were hunted, studied, treated as experimental subjects by someone who calculated that maternal instinct might be a tactical vulnerability to exploit. Then let's go introduce them to the concept of unforeseen consequences, Alina said quietly. Brief the mission profile. The next 2 hours were spent planning every detail of the operation. Launch sequence, formation positions, communication protocols, weapons employment criteria, emergency procedures, search and rescue coordination. Captain Thompson joined them for the final brief, along with the Roosevelt's captain and Admiral Holt via secure video conference from Norfolk. At 8:45 hours, Alina and her flight walked across the Roosevelt's deck toward their Ghost Hornets. The morning was beautiful, clear skies, light winds, sea state too. Perfect flying weather, which somehow made the mission feel more surreal. Perfect days shouldn't include flying towards someone trying to kill you. The deck crew had already prepared the aircraft. Maintenance chiefs stood by each plane, ready to report final status. Alina approached her Ghost Hornet, running her hand along the fuselage near the modified air intakes, feeling the sun-warmed metal under her palm. She's ready, Captain, the maintenance chief said. Fueled, armed, and every system checked twice. We don't know exactly what you're doing today, but whatever it is, this bird will do it. Alina climbed the ladder into the cockpit, settling into the ejection seat with the practiced movements of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. But this time felt different. This time she was strapping into an aircraft specifically designed for the moment everything went wrong, carrying weapons she might actually employ in combat, leading a mission that was simultaneously testing new technology and settling a very old score. The startup sequence was standard. Engines online, systems checks, communication established with the carrier's air boss. Around her, the rest of the flight completed the same procedures for Ghost Hornets coming alive on the Roosevelt's deck, ready to prove whether survival was just luck or whether it could be engineered. At 900 hours exactly, Alina's aircraft was positioned on Catapult 1. The deck crew gave the final checks, the catapult officer signaled, and Alina pushed the throttles to full power. The Ghost Hornet's engines roared, held back only by the catapult system. She saluted, confirming ready for launch, and 2 seconds later the catapult fired. The acceleration was instantaneous and violent, 0 to 150 knots in less than 300 feet. Alina's head pressed back against the headrest as the Ghost Hornet rocketed off the deck and transitioned from metal platform to open air in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Gear up, flaps up, climbing into the perfect blue sky above the South China Sea. Behind her, the other 3 pilots launched in sequence, forming up on her wings with the precision of people who'd trained together intensively over 36 hours, and who now trusted each other with everything that mattered. "Cipher flight check-in," Alina transmitted. 2, Valkyrie responded. 3, Redline confirmed. 4, Prophet completed. "Cipher flight is up and tactical," Alina reported to the Roosevelt's air control, proceeding to assign patrol station. For the next 30 minutes, they flew a standard combat air patrol pattern, maintaining station 40 miles from the carrier, running radar sweeps, simulating the normal operations of fighters protecting the carrier strike group. To anyone watching, including the electromagnetic warfare vessel monitoring their communications, they were just another flight of FA-18s doing routine duty. But Alina was counting down to the moment everything would change. At the designated time, she checked her navigation system, confirmed the GPS coordinates that marked their transition point, and transmitted on the flight's discrete frequency. "Cipher flight pushing now. Assume combat spread, maintain emissions control. Prophet start monitoring for the threat signature." The formation spread out, each aircraft taking position in a tactical formation designed to give them mutual support while making them harder to engage as a single group. Alina rolled her Ghost Hornet toward the coordinates where intelligence placed the electromagnetic warfare vessel and pushed the throttles forward. 450 knots, then 500. The modified Ghost Hornet accelerated smoothly, eating up the distance between routine patrol and deliberate confrontation. Her radar showed the target, a single surface contact at the expected location, moving slowly through international waters with the confidence of something that believed itself safe from retaliation. Prophet's voice came through the headset, tense but controlled. "Cipher, I'm getting anomalous electromagnetic emissions. Frequency matches the profile from your incident. They're tracking us." "Understood," Alina replied. "All aircraft stand by to switch to manual controls on my mark. Weapons tight until I give the order. Remember, our mission is to survive first, fight second. Stay with your training." The distance closed, 40 nautical miles, 35. Alina's hands rested on the controls with the light touch that came from years of experience, ready to take over manual flight the instant the automated systems failed. Her eyes scanned the instruments, watching for the first signs of electromagnetic interference. 30 nautical miles, Prophet's voice cut through. "Active engagement. They're transmitting at combat power. Estimate 5 seconds to systems impact." Alina's thumb found the red guarded switch on her control stick. Around her, the other 3 pilots did the same. 5 seconds became 4, 4 became 3. And then the Ghost Hornet's displays flickered, went dark for half a second, and came back online as the electromagnetic pulse hammered into her aircraft with precisely the same signature that had nearly killed her 6 months ago. But this time, Alina felt the difference. The flight controls remained responsive. The displays showed degraded information but didn't fail completely. The aircraft shuddered slightly, like someone had flicked it with a giant finger, but it kept flying. "Cipher flight status," she transmitted. 2, flight controls good, switching to manual as backup, Valkyrie reported, her voice carrying relief and surprise. 3, I'm solid, systems holding, Redline confirmed. 4. Electronic warfare systems partially degraded but functional, still tracking the threat, Prophet said. They'd survived. The electromagnetic attack that had disabled 17 other aircraft, that had forced ejections and emergency landings and months of investigation, it had just washed over the Ghost Hornets like water over designed channels. The countermeasures worked. For 3 seconds, Alina allowed herself to feel the vindication of survival, the proof that being hunted didn't have to mean being helpless. Then she switched back to tactical thinking. Cipher flight, maintain formation. Prophet confirmed that vessel as hostile based on electromagnetic attack. All aircraft, weapons free on my command. Her radar showed the vessel clearly now, 25 nautical miles and closing. The electromagnetic signature was still active, still transmitting, probably confused about why 4 American fighters were still flying toward them instead of falling out of the sky or running for the carrier. Alina armed her weapons systems, 2 AGM-88 HARM missiles specifically loaded for their anti-radiation capability, perfect for targeting the exact kind of electromagnetic emitters that had just attacked them. The tactical picture was clear. The vessel had committed a hostile act against American military aircraft in international waters. She had positive identification, electronic evidence of the attack, and weapons specifically designed to neutralize this threat. The rules of engagement gave her authority to respond. But Alina had learned something in 6 months of pushing a janitor cart across Norfolk's flight line, something that had crystallized during 36 hours of flying aircraft designed for survival rather than supremacy. Victory wasn't just about destroying threats. It was about making choices that couldn't be questioned, that couldn't be used to justify future attacks, that proved competence was paired with judgment. Cipher flight weapons hold, she transmitted. We're going to make a low pass first. Let them see that their weapon failed, let them understand that we could engage but we're choosing not to yet. Prophet, I want you recording everything. When we get back to the Roosevelt, I want evidence that proves beyond any doubt that we had them dead to rights and we still made the professional call. Valkyrie responded first. Cipher, are you sure? This is the shot. Clean, justified, no ambiguity. I'm sure, Alina said. Because when this goes to international maritime courts, when China or whoever owns that vessel tries to claim we attacked a civilian ship, I want the evidence to show that American pilots flew through their weapons fire, survived it, and still exercised restraint. That's the victory that matters, not the explosion, the proof that we're better than they are. The flight dropped to 200 feet above the water, 4 Ghost Hornets in tight formation, and screamed past the vessel at 500 knots with only a half-mile separation. Close enough to be unmistakable, close enough for anyone on that deck to see the ordnance under their wings, close enough to be absolutely certain they could have destroyed that ship and everyone on it. Alina saw figures on the deck, saw what looked like crew members scrambling, saw the vessel beginning an emergency turn that wouldn't have mattered at all if she'd released weapons. As they climbed away, heading back toward the Roosevelt, Prophet transmitted data to the carrier's intelligence, cell complete electronic records of the electromagnetic attack, their successful countermeasures, and the vessel's position and characteristics. Evidence that would be forwarded through channels that would end up in classified briefings, that would eventually force conversations about capabilities and deterrence, and the cost of believing American pilots were acceptable targets for testing weapons. Cipher flight, Roosevelt Tower, we're tracking your position. Confirm you are mission complete and returning to Mother, the carrier's air controller transmitted. Affirmed, Roosevelt. Mission complete. All aircraft systems operational. Requesting ready deck for recovery. The landing was routine. Another arrested landing that ended with Alina's Ghost Hornet chained to the Roosevelt's deck, surrounded by crews who were already swarming to examine the aircraft and confirm what the telemetry had shown. Admiral Holt was there when Alina climbed down, having flown out from Norfolk to the carrier specifically for this debrief. He waited until all 4 pilots were on deck, then spoke clearly enough for the assembled crews to hear. Ladies, you just proved something that's going to change naval aviation. You survived a weapons attack specifically designed to kill pilots like you. You maintained formation. You exercised rules of engagement with judgment that made the right choice over the easy choice, and you brought back evidence that will protect every pilot in this fleet. That's not just a successful test flight. That's leadership. Later, in the ready room with just the flight and the senior leadership, Alina gave the complete debrief. Every detail of the electromagnetic attack, every sensation of the Ghost Hornet's response, every tactical decision that led to their weapon hold order. Commander Chen recorded everything, already building the report that would justify production contracts for more Ghost Hornets, that would prove countermeasures against electromagnetic warfare were achievable, that would protect the next 17 pilots from becoming targets. The question now, Admiral Holt said, is what happens next. That vessel knows we survived their attack. They know we could have destroyed them. That changes the tactical calculus for whoever's running this program. Do they escalate? Do they withdraw? Or do they try something different? Alina thought about that vessel turning away, about the crew members scrambling on deck, about the moment they must have realized their weapon had failed and they were vulnerable to retaliation. They'll report that their testing phase failed, she said. They'll probably withdraw, redesign, and try again in a few years with improvements. But Admiral, here's what they learned today that they didn't expect. They learned that the vulnerability they were trying to exploit female pilots, mothers, people they assumed would prioritize survival over mission. That vulnerability doesn't exist. We proved that having more to live for makes you harder to kill, not easier. That's going to change their entire approach. Holt nodded slowly. Then we need to make sure that lesson spreads through the entire fleet. Dr. Nwasu, how fast can we get Ghost Hornets into production? 6 months for the first squadron, 18 months for fleet-wide deployment, the engineer said. But Admiral, I'd recommend something additional. We should stand up a training program specifically for electromagnetic warfare survival. Captain Vasquez and her flight just demonstrated techniques that need to be taught to every pilot in naval aviation. Not just the technology, but the mindset how to fly broken aircraft, how to make tactical decisions under degraded conditions, how to be the human element that technology can't replace. The conversation continued, turning toward policy and procurement and training pipelines. But Alina's mind was already on the flight home, on the video call she'd make to Sophia that evening, on the drawing her daughter would probably create showing Ghost Hornets surviving attacks instead of falling from the sky. 2 weeks later, back at Oceana, Alina stood in front of a classroom full of pilotsmen and women from every carrier air wing in the Atlantic Fleet. The lecture she was about to give had been written in collaboration with Dr. Nwasu, approved by Admiral Holt, and classified at a level that meant everyone in this room had been specifically vetted to hear it. 6 months ago, she began, I landed an FA-18 Super Hornet on the USS Ronald Reagan with complete hydraulic failure, using only manual backup controls, in conditions that every analysis said should have resulted in ejection or death. I survived because I'd been trained on old aircraft that didn't have computers between me and the air, but more importantly, I survived because I had a reason to survive that was bigger than the tactical situation. My daughter, Sophia, was waiting for me at home. She was drawing pictures of airplanes, and I was not going to let some asshole with an electromagnetic weapon take away her mother just because he thought maternal instinct made me weak. The room was absolutely silent. Lena pulled up imagery of the electromagnetic warfare vessel, of the Ghost Hornet modifications, of the telemetry from their mission. What I'm about to teach you isn't about being a better fighter pilot in the traditional sense. It's about being the kind of pilot who survives when everything fails, when your aircraft won't respond, when your displays are dark, when the only thing keeping you flying is your understanding of aerodynamics and your refusal to quit. Some of you will never need these skills. Some of you will need them next month. All of you need to know that when the technology fails, you don't fail with it. For the next 4 hours, she taught them everything she'd learned: how to recognize electromagnetic attack signatures, how to switch to manual controls under stress, how to calculate approach angles without computer assistance, how to make tactical decisions when half your sensors were lying to you. Valkyrie, Redline, and Prophet joined her for different sections, each bringing their own expertise to the curriculum. By the end of the day, every pilot in that room had a better understanding of what it meant to be the human element in a human-machine combat system. And more importantly, they understood that the Navy took electromagnetic warfare seriously enough to build new aircraft, develop new tactics, and train pilots specifically to counter this threat. The program became permanent. The Ghost Hornet went into production. And over the following year, as more pilots transitioned to the modified aircraft and learned the survival techniques Alina's flight had proven, the electromagnetic attacks stopped. Not because the capability went away, but because the adversary learned that American pilots couldn't be systematically disabled through technical attacks. The human element, especially the element that someone had mistaken for vulnerability, turned out to be the most effective countermeasure. 18 months after her mission, Alina received orders to a new assignment: Commander, Naval Air Systems Command Test Pilot School. The job that had originally taught her how to fly without computers now expanded to teach every test pilot how to survive when computers failed. She accepted with the understanding that Sophia, now 10 years old, would be old enough to understand why her mother sometimes had to be away, teaching other pilots how to survive what they hoped would never happen. On her last day at Oceana before transferring to Maryland, Admiral Holt visited her office. He'd brought something: a framed photograph showing 4 Ghost Hornets in formation, taken from a camera ship during a training flight. Beneath it was a small plaque: Cipher Flight, First Electromagnetic Warfare Survival Mission, proof that competence and care are the same strength. "I thought you should have this," Holt said. "Because what you did that day over the South China Sea, surviving when someone wanted you dead, proving that being underestimated is their mistake rather than your limitation, choosing restraint when violence was justified, that's going to echo through naval aviation for decades. Every pilot who learns these techniques, every Ghost Hornet that keeps someone alive, every parent who comes home because they knew how to fly broken, that's your legacy, Cipher." Alina took the photograph, studying the image of 4 aircraft that represented a moment when the Navy decided survival was worth engineering, when someone looked at 17 attacked pilots and said, "Not acceptable," when the vulnerability someone tried to exploit became the foundation of a new capability. "Sophia wants to be a pilot," Alina said quietly. "She's 10, so that might change 17 times before she's old enough to apply to Annapolis. But Admiral, if she ends up strapping into a fighter someday, I want her to fly in a Navy that learned from what happened to us, that built better aircraft because our survival mattered, that taught better tactics because our competence was taken seriously, that understood being someone's mother didn't make us less capable. It made us exactly capable enough." Holt nodded. "Then that's the Navy we'll build, one flight at a time, one survival at a time. One choice at a time, to prove that caring about coming home doesn't make you weak. It makes you someone worth the investment of building aircraft that can bring you there." They stood together in the office, 2 officers looking at a photograph of 4 aircraft that had flown through weapons fire and survived, and they understood that the real victory wasn't technical. It was cultural. It was the slow transformation of an institution that learned to value the complete human in the cockpit. Not just the combat skills, not just the tactical judgment, but the whole person with reasons to survive that made survival worth engineering. That evening, Alina drove home to the apartment she still kept near Oceana, where Sophia was finishing homework at the kitchen table, surrounded by drawings that now included Ghost Hornets alongside the regular FA-18s. "Mom," Sophia said, looking up from her math problems, "Ms. Rodriguez said her cousin flies jets in the Navy. She said maybe you know him." Alina smiled. "Maybe. The Navy's big, but naval aviation is surprisingly small. Everyone kind of knows everyone eventually." She said he told her that the coolest thing about being a pilot isn't the flying. It's knowing you can handle things when they go wrong. Is that true? Alina sat down next to her daughter, looking at the drawings spread across the table aircraft at all angles, some climbing some level, one drawn with careful detail showing manual control surfaces extended. "Yeah," she said. "That's true. The flying is great. But the real thing is knowing that when everything fails, you don't fail. You just switch to a different way of succeeding. Kind of like how you're good at math, but when you can't remember a formula, you can figure it out from other things you know." Sophia considered this with the seriousness of someone processing concepts that would shape how she saw challenges. So being good isn't about never having problems. It's about knowing what to do when problems happen. Exactly, Alina confirmed. And sometimes the problems are really big and you can't solve them by yourself. So you have to work with other people who are also good at handling problems. That's what I did with Valkyrie, Redline, and Prophet. We all survived something bad separately, and then we survived it better together. Sophia returned to her homework, but Alina saw her daughter glance at the drawings. At the aircraft she'd rendered with careful 8-year-old precision, always showing them in flight, always showing them going somewhere instead of sitting still. 6 years later, Sophia was 16 and taking her first flight lessons at a civilian airport near their home in Maryland. Alina sat in the observation area, watching her daughter practice touch-and-goes in a Cessna 172, and she saw in Sophia's approach angles the same deliberate precision she'd once used herself. The same refusal to accept close enough, when exactly right was possible. The same understanding that flying was about judgment as much as skill. After the lesson, they sat in the car before driving home, and Sophia asked the question Alina had been waiting for. "Do you think I could do what you do? Fly fighters, fly when things go wrong, be the kind of pilot people depend on?" Alina looked at her daughter 16 years old, confident in ways Alina had taken decades to achieve, already understanding that competence was something you built rather than something you were born with. "I think you could do anything you committed to. But Sophia, if you choose naval aviation, you need to understand something. You'll spend years proving yourself in ways that feel unfair. You'll be underestimated because of your gender, questioned because people assume your decisions must be influenced by emotion rather than tactical judgment, treated like your competence is surprising instead of earned. And if you become a mother someday, some people will treat that as a liability instead of recognizing it as motivation to be even better." Sophia nodded slowly. "But you changed that, right? You and the other pilots, you proved that being underestimated is their mistake." "We started the change," Alina corrected. "We proved that the assumptions were wrong, but changing assumptions isn't the same as changing culture. That takes longer, takes more people making the same point in different ways until finally it becomes obvious to everyone. So if you choose this, you'll be part of continuing that change, not benefiting from completed change. Participating in ongoing transformation." "Sounds like it's worth doing," Sophia said simply. "Sounds like the kind of thing that matters." They drove home talking about flight schools and academy applications, and the specific mathematics of orbital mechanics that Sophia was studying in her advanced physics class. But Alina's mind was on that moment 18 months ago when she'd stood in the rain at Norfolk, feeling like the smallest possible version of herself, and then found a way back to the sky that proved small spaces could contain enormous capability. She thought about Admiral Holt standing outside a hangar, watching the aircraft his daughter used to fly. About Dr. Nwasu building countermeasures because someone's competence deserved protection. About Valkyrie, Redline, and Prophet choosing to fly toward threat instead of away from it. About all the choices that added up to culture shift, one decision at a time. That evening, Alina's phone rang. Admiral Holt, retired now but still connected to every conversation that mattered in naval aviation. "Cypher," he said, using her call sign despite both of them being in civilian clothes in civilian spaces. "Thought you should know. The Appropriations Committee just approved funding for a full squadron of Ghost Hornets assigned to every carrier strike group, 48 aircraft in total, and they're requiring electromagnetic warfare survival training for every fighter pilot in the fleet. What you started is now mandatory doctrine." Alina smiled. That's good news, Admiral. How's Commander Holt doing? Rachel's back in flight status as of last month, Holt said, and Alina could hear the emotion carefully controlled in his voice. Took her 2 years, but she's flying Hawkeyes again. Different squadron, different carrier, but same determination. She said to tell you that she thinks about that rainstorm sometimes, about her father standing in the dark trying to process losing her to something he couldn't protect her from, and about you being the person who reminded him that protection isn't about preventing challenges. It's about building the capability to survive them. They talked for another 20 minutes about promotions and policy changes and the slow transformation of an institution that was learning to value the whole person in uniform. When Alina hung up, Sophia was watching her from the kitchen doorway. Was that about your mission? The one where you survived the electromagnetic attack? Sort of, Alina said. It was about what happened after the mission, about how surviving something once creates the foundation for others to survive it better. About how legacy isn't just what you do, it's what you're doing enables other people to do. Sophia came and sat next to her mother on the couch, the same couch where 18 months ago Alina had sat with her helmet bag, trying to decide if going back to flight status was courage or foolishness. I've been thinking about my call sign, Sophia said. If I become a pilot, if I get good enough that they let me pick. That's a few years away still, Alina said gently. But what are you thinking? Inheritance, Sophia said, because everything you did surviving, teaching, changing how the Navy thinks about competence, that's something I inherit, not pressure to live up to, just foundation to build on. That's what inheritance really means, right? What you receive that lets you do more than you could alone. Alina pulled her daughter close, understanding in that moment that legacy wasn't about being remembered. It was about building foundations strong enough that the next generation could reach higher without questioning whether the ground beneath them would hold. Outside, the Maryland evening was settling into darkness, but somewhere over the Pacific, carrier operations continued. FA-18s launched into night skis. Pilots flew combat air patrols, and among them were Ghost Hornets aircraft that existed because 17 women were hunted, and 4 of them flew back into the threat to prove that survival could be engineered, that being underestimated was tactical advantage, that care and competence were the same strength expressed in different contexts. Years from now, some of those pilots would be like Sophia, daughters and sons of the generation that fought to prove their capability, inheriting a culture that had been shaped by people who refused to accept that maternal instinct was weakness. They would fly better aircraft, trained with better tactics, supported by doctrine that understood the human element was the most critical component in any combat system. And they would probably never know the names Cypher, Valkyrie, Redline, and Prophet. They wouldn't need to, because the best legacy isn't fame. It's the foundation that becomes so solid people stop questioning whether it will hold. Alina Vasquez retired from the Navy at the rank of Admiral, after serving as commander of Naval Air Systems Command and fundamentally transforming how the service approached pilot training and aircraft development. She never flew combat again after that single mission over the South China Sea, but she didn't need to. That one flight, those 12 minutes of proving that electromagnetic warfare couldn't disable pilots who understood how to fly broken aircraft, created ripples that changed everything that came after. Admiral Holt's daughter, Rachel, eventually commanded a carrier air wing, leading from the front in the aircraft her father had once watched sitting silent in a hangar. Dr. Nwasu received the Defense Distinguished Civilian Service Award for her work on the Ghost Hornet, which became the foundation for an entire generation of survivable military aircraft. Valkyrie, Redline, and Prophet all continued flying, each contributing to the evolution of naval aviation in their own way. But the most important legacy wasn't measurable in awards or promotions or aircraft production numbers. It was measurable in the young pilots who joined naval aviation without ever considering that being a woman or being a mother might be seen as a liability. It was measurable in the tactical doctrine that assumed competence rather than questioned it. It was measurable in the quiet confidence of people who knew that when their aircraft failed, they wouldn't fail with it, because someone had cared enough to teach them how to survive. 20 years after that mission, Sofia Vasquez graduated from the Naval Academy with orders to flight school. Her mother attended the ceremony, wearing civilian clothes but carrying herself with the specific bearing of someone who'd earned every decision she'd made. They stood together afterward, looking at the chapel where Sofia had just received her commission, and Sofia asked one final question. Do you ever regret it? Going back to flight status, leading that mission, risking everything when you could have stayed safe. Alina thought about standing in the rain at Norfolk, about feeling like the smallest version of herself, about choosing to return to the sky not despite her fear, but because of what it would prove. I regret that it was necessary, she said finally. I regret that 17 pilots had to be attacked before someone took it seriously enough to build countermeasures. I regret that we still live in a world where competence has to be proven more thoroughly for some people than others. But do I regret choosing to be part of the solution? No. Because Sofia, here's what I learned. Legacy isn't about being perfect. It's about being present when your presence matters. It's about making the choice that proves something important, even when easier choices exist. It's about building foundations so solid that people like you can climb higher without worrying whether the ground will hold. They walked across the academy grounds together, mother and daughter, admiral and newly commissioned ensign, two people whose lives had been shaped by a rainstorm, a knock on a door, and a decision to fly toward threat instead of away from it. And somewhere over the Pacific, carrier operations continued. Pilots launched into infinite sky, some flying Ghost Hornets, some flying newer aircraft built on lessons learned from Alina's generation. They flew with confidence that someone had already proven they could survive the worst, that the technology existed to protect them, that their competence was assumed rather than questioned. That was the victory, not destroying a vessel in the South China Sea, not even surviving an electromagnetic attack. The victory was building a world where survival was expected, where competence was foundation rather than surprise, where caring about coming home made you more dangerous rather than more vulnerable. Alina Vasquez, call sign Cypher, had helped build that world. One flight at a time, one survival at a time, one choice at a time to prove that being underestimated wasn't her limitation, it was their mistake. And in the end, that was the only legacy that mattered, teaching the next generation not to accept underestimation, but to use it as fuel for proving something the world needed to learn. The sky didn't care about gender or assumptions. It only cared about competence. And competence, Alina had proven, came in forms the world was still learning to recognize. 20 years later, flying over that same stretch of South China Sea, Sofia Vasquez would lead her own mission, flying aircraft her mother had helped design, using tactics her mother had helped develop. She wouldn't think about legacy or inheritance or foundation. She would just fly with the confidence that came from knowing someone had already proven this was possible, someone had already walked this path, someone had already built the ground solid enough that climbing didn't require questioning whether it would hold. That was the gift Alina had given her daughter, and through her daughter, given to everyone who came after. Not fame, not glory, just the quiet certainty that when everything failed, they wouldn't fail with it. Because someone had already proven that survival was a choice, competence was foundation, and care was the strength that made all the rest possible. The rain still fell at Norfolk Naval Base. Storms still rolled across carrier decks. Aircraft still failed in ways that tested pilots beyond their training. But now, when those moments came, there was doctrine, there were aircraft, there were techniques all built from the foundation of 4 pilots who flew into electromagnetic weapons fire and came back alive. That was enough. That was everything. And in apartments across America, children still drew pictures of airplanes, always climbing, always reaching for altitude. Because someone had proven that the sky was for everyone who earned it. And earning it wasn't about being fearless. It was about flying anyway with all your fear and all your strength, proving that the one was fuel for the other. That was the story. That was the legacy. That was what it meant to be Cypher the pilot who saw patterns others missed, who survived what was designed to be unsurvivable, who built foundation from fragments. She flew once more into threat and came back with proof that care and competence weren't contradictions. They were two words for the same truth, that the people with the most to live for fly the hardest to stay alive. And that truth, once proven, changed everything that came after.